When I first saw the house, it felt like stepping into a version of my life I had been chasing for years, but never managed to grasp. White siding, a porch wide enough for two rocking chairs, a little swing that groaned in the breeze. It looked like the kind of home people pin to vision boards and write into journals. After years of renting cramped apartments, always checking over my shoulder at noisy neighbors, patching leaks myself because landlords never cared, this place was supposed to be freedom. My brother was the one who made it happen. Or at least, that was the story I told myself as I stood in the living room, breathing in the faint scent of fresh paint and imagining a future where everything finally settled. He grinned at me with that easy confidence he always wore when he closed a deal, clapping me on the back as though we had both won. "You're never going to find anything like this at this price," he said, eyes gleaming with pride, as if he had secured me the last golden ticket in town. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my older brother. He was family. Our childhood had been a patchwork of shared bedrooms and whispered promises in the dark. Promises that no matter how messy life got, we'd always protect each other. That bond, once so unbreakable, was why I didn't hesitate when he told me this listing was a steal. He had been in real estate for nearly a decade, and though I sometimes rolled my eyes at his showmanship, I respected his knowledge. When he said a house was worth it, I trusted his word like scripture. He told me the market was brutal, that people were overpaying for shacks barely standing, but that he'd found me a gem hidden in plain sight. "Timing, little sis, that's everything," he said, his voice low and persuasive, the way he'd always spoken when convincing me to follow his lead. I toured the house with him at my side, and though some parts felt too perfect, like the strategically placed candles masking an odd dampness in the air, or the way the basement lights flickered once before staying steady, I brushed it off. Excitement made me blind. He narrated every room as if reading from a glossy brochure. The kitchen's granite countertops gleamed like a promise of dinner parties to come. The upstairs bedroom had a bay window that flooded the space with sunlight, and the backyard stretched far enough to imagine barbecues, gardens, even maybe one day a dog. Each word draped over me like a charm spell, muting the quiet doubts that tickled the back of my mind. I remember asking about the inspection, my voice casual, but not without edge. He waved the question away with that familiar smirk. "Already handled, clean as a whistle, don't worry so much, you've got me looking out for you." And there it was again, the reassurance I had always accepted, the idea that my brother was the one constant I could rely on. He had seen me through heartbreaks, through career changes, through the lonely stretch after I moved to this city with nothing but a suitcase and a little money saved. If he said the house was safe, I wanted to believe it. No, more than wanted, I needed to believe it. That first week leading up to closing was a blur of signatures and phone calls. He handled everything, shepherding me through paperwork with practiced efficiency, sliding contracts across the table with a pen ready in his hand. The language was dense, packed with legalese that felt deliberately impenetrable. But each time I faltered, he would lean over and point, "That's standard. This one just confirms you're the buyer. Don't get hung up on the details. You'll drive yourself crazy." And like a dutiful little sister, I signed. Every page I initialed felt like a leap closer to security, to adulthood, to finally having something that was mine. On the day of closing, I walked out clutching the keys like they were relics. The metal was cool and sharp against my palm, a tangible weight that screamed permanence. My brother hugged me tight, nearly lifting me off my feet, and for a moment, it was pure joy. I told myself this was the culmination of years of hard work, the sacrifice of sleepless nights and jobs that barely paid rent. I didn't know yet that it was also the culmination of his lies. The move itself was chaos in the way moves always are. Boxes stacked taller than me, furniture wedged in stairwells, sweat sticking my hair to my forehead. Friends helped for a few hours before drifting away, leaving me surrounded by half-emptied boxes and echoes bouncing off bare walls. It was late by the time I finally collapsed on the couch, a takeout container balanced on my lap. I remember looking around at the unfamiliar space, half expecting the walls to pulse with a heartbeat. The quiet was thick, broken only by the occasional groan of pipes and the faint whine of wind against windows. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt like the threshold to something new. I told myself comfort would come with time. That night, I padded barefoot across the cool hardwood floors, running my fingers along door frames, whispering little dreams into the empty rooms. This would be my reading nook. That wall would be covered in photos. Here, maybe, one day a crib. The possibilities shimmered in the air like fireflies. I opened the back door and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp scent of wet earth. A neighbor's porch light flicked on across the yard, and for a moment, we exchanged a wave. She smiled, but her eyes lingered on me with something I couldn't quite read. Pity? Curiosity? I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overanalyzing, the way I always did when left alone too long in my own head. When I crawled into bed, exhaustion hit me like a tide. My mattress was still on the floor, sheets wrinkled from being hastily unpacked, but I didn't care. I drifted into sleep, thinking about how proud Mom would have been to see me here, finally with a place to call my own. I told myself I had crossed some invisible threshold into stability, into a future unshaken by the chaos of my 20s. What I didn't know, what no amount of daydreaming could have prepared me for, was how quickly that illusion would shatter. In the days before the flood, there had been subtle clues, but I ignored them, the way you ignore a slight headache when you're determined to enjoy your day. A faint musty smell in the basement that lingered even after I left a window cracked. A water stain on the corner of the ceiling I convinced myself was just old and harmless. The way the neighbor's expression shifted when I mentioned how thrilled I was to have found the house at such a bargain. "Sometimes the market's funny like that," she said, her smile tight, before changing the subject. But I didn't press. My brother's voice always replayed in my head, smooth and confident, drowning out any unease. "You scored a steal. You're lucky to have me." And I was lucky, I thought, as I unpacked books onto shelves and folded clothes into drawers. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft sneaking under doors, felt like part of the house's character. Old homes had quirks. That was part of their charm. I told myself the dampness I sometimes felt in the air would go away once I settled in. I told myself the flickering lights were just bad bulbs. I told myself stories to quiet the gnawing doubts because admitting them out loud would have meant questioning my brother, and questioning him felt like pulling a thread I wasn't ready to unravel. Looking back now, I wonder if he saw the hesitation in my eyes when I asked about the inspection, or if he noticed how long I stared at that stain on the ceiling. Did he clock the way I lingered in the basement, frowning at the smell, before forcing a smile? Did he know I was suppressing my instincts, or did he count on it? Because he knew me better than anyone, knew how badly I wanted to believe in him, in us, in the idea that family could still mean something unshakable. And maybe that's the cruelest part, how easily he used that bond to blind me. That first night, I drifted to sleep in blissful ignorance, dreaming of dinners cooked in my new kitchen, of laughter spilling across the porch, of roots finally planted. I didn't know yet that beneath the floorboards, water was waiting. I didn't know that the house my brother called a steal would soon reveal itself as a trap, swallowing me whole before I even had a chance to settle. The night the flood came, it began so quietly I almost convinced myself I was dreaming. I had fallen asleep on my mattress on the floor, wrapped in thin sheets that still smelled faintly of the cardboard boxes they'd been packed in. The house around me was hushed, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sleep, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of pipes cooling in the walls. It was just after midnight when I stirred, half conscious, to a strange sound, a soft, rhythmic drip. At first I thought it was rain tapping the windows, but when I opened my eyes, the room was dry, and the blinds were drawn. Still, the noise persisted, deliberate and steady, like water falling into a shallow pool. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and the chill of the hardwood floor beneath my feet startled me. It wasn't just cold. It was damp. My toes sank into something slick, and for a second, my brain refused to process it. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept the beam across the floor. The sight froze me. Water, pooling in irregular shapes, reflecting the light back in trembling ripples. My heart began to pound as I swung the light toward the corner of the room where the wall met the floor. A thin trickle seeped through the baseboard, snaking across the wood like veins spreading from a wound. I told myself to stay calm. Old houses had quirks, right? Maybe it was condensation, maybe a minor leak, but when I padded toward the hallway, the water grew deeper, soaking the cuffs of my pajamas, turning the wood slick beneath my feet. The sound that had woken me, dripping, splashing, gurgling, was louder now, echoing through the hall like a sinister chorus. Each step carried me closer to the source, and dread twisted in my gut with every inch. The kitchen was worse. Water streamed from beneath the cabinets, puddling around the legs of the table I hadn't even had a chance to eat at yet. The air smelled wrong, musty, and metallic. The scent of rust and mold that had been waiting just beneath the surface. I waded deeper, the water sloshing against my ankles now, and realized this wasn't just a leak. This was something catastrophic. I stumbled down the basement steps, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, and what I saw made me gasp. The basement was a pool. Water surged from the walls, pouring in with the force of an open tap, rising fast. Cardboard boxes floated like wreckage from a shipwreck, bumping into the support beams with soft, mocking thuds. The concrete floor was already invisible, swallowed by a swirling black current that lapped against the bottom steps. The flickering light bulb overhead buzzed dangerously, its reflection quivering on the water's surface like some unstable mirage. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs, and felt the reality sink in. My house was flooding, not in some slow, manageable trickle, but in a raging rush that threatened to consume everything. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I sprinted back upstairs, water splashing with each step, my breath coming fast and shallow. I grabbed my phone and called my brother, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy and irritated. "Do you know what time it is?" "It's flooding," I screamed, not caring about the hour, not caring about his tone. "The basement, no, the whole house, it's filling with water. What the hell is happening?" For a long moment there was silence, then a sharp exhale. "Calm down," he said flatly, as if I'd told him the sink was clogged. "It's probably just a plumbing issue. Houses have hiccups. Call a plumber in the morning." "In the morning?" My voice cracked, almost hysterical. "I'm standing in water right now. It's rising. It's everywhere. This isn't a hiccup. This is a disaster." He sighed, the kind of sound he made when I used to nag him as kids, the sound that always made me feel like I was being unreasonable. "You're exaggerating. It can't be that bad. Just shut off the main valve. Every house has one. It'll stop the water until you can get it fixed." I wanted to throttle him through the phone. "Where is it? Where's the valve?" There was a pause, then a half-hearted chuckle. "Honestly, not sure. I've never been in that basement. You'll figure it out." And just like that, he hung up. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, even after the line went dead, stunned by the weight of his dismissal. The water was seeping faster now, spreading like a living thing, and here I was, abandoned, with nothing but a flashlight and panic. Rage burned through my fear, hot and bitter, but there was no time to indulge it. I tossed my phone on the counter and started searching, opening every door, checking every corner, desperate to find the shutoff valve that he had so casually mentioned. My hand slipped on wet knobs, my breath came in frantic bursts, but the valve remained elusive, hidden in a place I couldn't find fast enough. By the time I circled back to the living room, the water was high enough to soak the legs of the couch, and my boxes, the ones holding photo albums, journals, the fragile remnants of my life, were beginning to collapse, spilling their contents into the murky tide. Pages floated like drowned birds, curling and disintegrating before my eyes. I lunged forward, grabbing at them, stuffing wet scraps back into boxes, tears blurring my vision. It was useless. The water didn't care what it swallowed. Every sound magnified, the rush of water beneath the floor, the creaks and groans of wood straining under pressure, the frantic slap of my own movements. My skin prickled with cold as the water climbed higher, and the smell intensified, a nauseating mix of rot and mildew that clung to the back of my throat. I couldn't stop shaking, whether from the cold or the terror, I didn't know. At some point, I forced myself outside. The porch steps were slick, the lawn a marsh, rivulets of water carving paths toward the street. I stood barefoot in the grass, clutching myself, staring at my house, my supposed dream home, as it wept water from the seams like a broken vessel. Porch lights flicked on across the street. Curtains shifted. Neighbors peered out, their silhouettes frozen in quiet sympathy or morbid curiosity. One woman, the same neighbor I had waved to the night before, stepped on her porch. She called something out, but her words were muffled by the rush in my ears. When I finally caught them, they sent a fresh chill down my spine. Not again. Not again. Those two words sliced through me like glass. This wasn't new. This wasn't random. This had happened before. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my throat felt raw, clogged by the cold air and the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I stumbled back inside, determined not to stand helpless in my own yard while my life sunk. I grabbed towels, blankets, anything I could find, shoving them against door frames in a futile effort to stem the flow. The fabric grew heavy and useless within seconds, the water laughing at my effort as it surged past. I pulled at boxes, dragging what I could onto higher shelves, my muscles aching with desperation. Each time I saved one thing, two more slipped away. Time blurred into a frantic loop. Grab, lift, slip, curse, sob, repeat. My phone buzzed once with a message from my brother. Seriously, calm down. It'll look worse than it is. Don't panic. I threw it across the room. The sound of it hitting the wall was swallowed instantly by the water. By dawn, I was exhausted, my body trembling from cold and strain. The house looked like a battlefield, furniture half submerged, debris floating lazily across the surface. The air was damp and heavy, my lungs working harder with every breath. I collapsed on the stairs, the only dry spot left, and buried my face in my hands. Everything I had dreamed of, every image of cozy evenings, every plan for dinners and gardens and warmth, was gone, washed away before it even began. But beneath the grief, beneath the exhaustion, something else took root. Anger. White, hot, unrelenting anger. My brother had called this a steal. He had told me not to worry, that he was looking out for me. And yet on my very first night, I was sitting in a sinking house, my belongings ruined, my body shivering, my future drowning in front of me. He knew. He had to have known. And if he thought I was going to roll over, mop up the mess, and thank him for it, he was dead wrong. The morning after the flood, when the sun finally cut through the curtains and lit the ruin of my home, I felt like I had awakened inside a stranger's nightmare, except every broken thing belonged to me, and the shock of seeing it in daylight made it worse. The water had retreated some, leaving a glistening sheen across the floors and soggy wreckage where my life had once been carefully stacked in boxes, photographs curling at the edges like dying leaves, clothes plastered to the floor in sodden heaps, furniture bloated and discolored as though it had aged decades overnight. And the smell, God, the smell was unbearable, a choking mix of mildew and rust that clawed down my throat and coated my tongue. And as I stood ankle-deep in the wreckage of my supposed dream home, I knew I couldn't put off the call any longer, so I dialed my brother, my hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with rage. He answered with that same maddening calm, his voice sluggish with irritation as though I were the one inconveniencing him. And when I demanded to know why the house had flooded, his tone was dismissive, almost patronizing. "You're overreacting," he said. "Houses have problems. You patch it up, you move on. That's just homeownership. Welcome to the club." And I could hardly believe my ears, because this wasn't some loose shingle or a drafty window. This was structural failure. This was water rising like a beast inside my walls. And when I pressed him, when I demanded to know if he had known about the house's history, his voice grew sharper, colder, and he turned the accusation back on me, telling me I was being dramatic, that I had signed the paperwork of my own free will, that if I was too naive to read the fine print, it wasn't his fault. And in that moment, the betrayal solidified, hard as stone in my chest, because I realized he wasn't going to help me, wasn't going to admit anything, wasn't going to be the brother who once promised in whispered voices that he'd protect me no matter what. He was just another salesman covering his tracks. Still, part of me clung to hope, so I called the insurance company, and the adjuster who came out wore the kind of look I'd seen on doctors when they're about to deliver bad news, sympathy mixed with detachment. He clicked his pen, scribbled notes, and finally explained in clipped, rehearsed sentences that the damage wasn't covered because the flooding was due to a pre-existing issue, something about known foundation vulnerabilities. And the phrase known rang in my head like a gavel, because known meant someone had known before me, and that someone had been my brother. I asked about repairs, about cost, and the numbers he rattled off were obscene, more than I had saved in all my years of scrimping, the kind of figure that doesn't just empty your bank account, but drags you into debt like quicksand. And as he left, offering a half-hearted good luck, I felt my knees give way, collapsing onto the wet stairs where I had cried hours earlier. Except this time, it wasn't fear or exhaustion. It was the crushing weight of betrayal, of realizing the person I trusted most had sold me a lie wrapped in fresh paint and charm. Days blurred after that, filled with phone calls, contractors shaking their heads, neighbors offering pieces of the puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. "Oh yeah, that place floods every few years. Surprised they found a buyer this time," one said, eyes averted like she couldn't bear to meet mine. Another mentioned lawsuits from the past owner, whispers of payouts, cover-ups, a reputation my brother had to have known. Because he was a realtor, this was his job. And yet he had pushed me into this purchase with a smile, all the while pretending it was a gift, a steal, when in truth, it was a trap he needed someone to take off his hands. Each time I confronted him after, he deflected, gaslit, told me I was imagining things, that neighbors exaggerate, that houses settle, that I was too emotional to see clearly. And I began to recognize the pattern, the way he wielded words like weapons, cutting down my confidence until I doubted myself. But the evidence was undeniable. The inspection papers looked forged, or at the very least, suspiciously incomplete. Whole sections skimmed over or written in vague jargon, the basement not even mentioned in detail. And when I pressed him on it, his jaw tightened and he told me to drop it if I didn't want to make things worse. And that was when I understood that this wasn't just negligence. This was betrayal, calculated and deliberate, that he had known about the flooding, known about the lawsuits, known about the house's history, and still he had sold it to me, his own sister, because to him I wasn't family, I was a mark. The realization scorched me from the inside, a mix of heartbreak and fury that kept me awake at night, lying in damp sheets in a house that smelled of rot, listening to the distant drip of water that never fully went away. And every sound became a reminder that I had been played by the one person I should have been able to trust. And the worst part was how he carried on as though nothing had happened, still posting on social media about his successful closings, still flaunting his polished smile at open houses, still selling the dream to strangers while I lived in the nightmare he had handed me. The confrontation that finally broke me came a week later, when I showed up at his office, drenched in exhaustion, armed with photos of the damage and copies of the insurance denial, and laid it all on his desk, my voice shaking as I demanded answers, demanded an apology, demanded something to prove I hadn't imagined all of this. But he leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and smirked, the same smirk he had used to sell me the house, and told me that business was business, that I had signed, that the moment my pen hit the paper, it had become my problem, not his. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Because I realized he wasn't just careless, he was cruel, willing to gamble with my future, my money, my safety, just to make a sale. And the brother I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a man I didn't recognize, a man who had chosen greed over blood. And as I stormed out of that office, every eye on the room, shame burning in my cheeks. I swore I would not let him win. I would not drown quietly in the mess he had left me. I would find a way to fight back, to expose him, to make sure he paid for what he had done. Because this was no longer just about a house or money. This was about betrayal at the deepest level. And the only thing that could quiet the rage that consumed me was the thought of revenge, sharp and satisfying, the kind that doesn't just balance the scales, but tips them until the liar who sold me this nightmare loses everything he thought he had secured by sacrificing me. After that confrontation in his office, I stopped crying and started listening. Because anger sharpens the senses in ways grief never can. And as I sat night after night in the damp silence of my ruined home, I began piecing together the puzzle. Scraps of neighbor gossip, whispers from contractors, public records that anyone with patience could dig up, and slowly the picture became too clear to ignore. The house had been flooded twice before, lawsuits filed and quietly settled, insurance denied more than once, city inspectors issuing citations that mysteriously disappeared from official listings. And every breadcrumb led me back to one person. My brother, the realtor, who had known every detail. And still, revenge didn't come to me like some fiery outburst. It arrived slow and deliberate, coiling itself around my grief until it became the only thing keeping me upright. And with every soggy step across warped floorboards, every glance at the piles of ruined memories, I grew more certain that I couldn't just repair the damage and move on. I had to make him face it. I had to make the world see him for what he really was. So I threw myself into the hunt with a clarity I hadn't felt in months, scouring public records until my eyes ached, tracking down old owners who told me through clenched teeth how they too had been fooled, compiling emails, inspection papers, photographs, and affidavits into a folder so thick it felt like a weapon. And when I finally walked into a lawyer's office, clutching that folder like a lifeline, the attorney's brows rose higher with each page she turned, her pen tapping with a rhythm that sounded a lot like victory. She told me I had a case strong enough to break not only my brother's wallet, but his license, his career, his precious reputation, and that word, reputation, rang in my ears because I knew how much he thrived on the image of being the golden realtor, the man who could sell dreams, and I decided that was what I would target first. Before the lawsuit could crawl through the courts, I went public, posting my story online with pictures of the flooded rooms, screenshots of texts where he dismissed me, and copies of documents showing he'd ignored inspection reports. And the internet, ravenous as it is, devoured it, spreading my post like wildfire across neighborhood groups, real estate forums, even local news who called asking for an interview. And for once, I said yes. Standing in front of cameras in my ruined living room, telling anyone who would listen how my own brother sold me a nightmare house for profit. And as the words left my mouth, I felt something shift, as if every ounce of shame I'd carried was being returned to its rightful owner. Within days, clients started backing out of his listings, neighbors whispered louder, and his name, once polished and admired, became synonymous with betrayal. But it didn't stop there, because the lawsuit hit like a second storm, dragging him into depositions where his smirk cracked, where he tried to talk his way out of forged inspections and vanished citations, only to have my evidence laid before him piece by damning piece. And when the court finally ruled that he had knowingly misrepresented the property, awarding me damages and ordering disciplinary action, the look on his face was a strange cocktail of fury and disbelief, as if he had never imagined his little sister could topple him. The real estate board revoked his license, the lawsuits piled up, and one by one, his so-called colleagues distanced themselves. His phone that once buzzed with clients now silent, his once bright future dimmed to a shadow. And though part of me thought it would feel hollow, it didn't. It felt like balance, like the universe finally leaning back in my direction. And as I stood outside the courthouse that final day, papers in hand, I realized the house behind me, rotting and broken, no longer owned me. It had been transformed from a tomb into a weapon, one I used to expose the truth. And when I finally moved out, leaving the keys with the bank and walking away without a backward glance, I carried no shame, only the steady rhythm of resolve, because my brother had gambled that family meant blind trust, but I had taught him that family, when betrayed, can also mean justice, sharpened to a blade. And though our bond would never be repaired, I had reclaimed something far more important: myself, my dignity, my voice. And as I sat in the sunlight of my new apartment, boxes stacked, but dry this time, laughter echoing from neighbors through walls that didn't groan with water, I whispered to myself a truth that tasted sweeter than any victory I'd ever known. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. And in that refusal, you rise, stronger, unbroken, and free.